Biden looked inept. Kamala Harris is an inexperienced politician.
Huge storyline of the night. I mean, it's a big storyline either way because control of the Senate matters for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about. But that's how the map has been looking, and so we're waiting on these two outstanding states.
And they're already part of the way there. They already have this pickup in West Virginia. We cannot stress the map. If Vice President Harris were to win the White House, it would be incredibly challenging for her to get judicial nominees confirmed, to get her cabinet confirmed with the Republicans.
How would she get a cabinet if she loses?
We're in the top of the hour, but we're still no calls on any of the battleground states. Are you surprised we are where we are right now?
Yeah.
No, because as Claire McCaskill has said so accurately, what we are seeing has been reflected in the polls.
The polls maybe
As
were right.
Leading up to this evening, it looks like the polls were right. This is a 50-50 race, and so this is going to go down to the wire in all of these battlegrounds.
Close race means a long time. We can put it that way, right? I mean, I think that's generally the vibe. We'll see how it goes. I think everybody's looking towards Pennsylvania, just in chatting with
All right, well, let's check back into the presidential race, and we'll take a look at the road to 270.
So she got 91, and he is at 210. Oh, he's only got to get 60 more.
It is 10:51 in the East, and here is where we stand right now on the road to 270 electoral votes. Those will be the keys to get into the White House in the next year. Right now, we want to go to Peter Alexander at Harris headquarters.
What's crazy is how far
ahead
Trump is with the popular vote. That's wild.
Well, we're outside and it's a loud one here, but I can tell you if you get into the crowd here, it's particularly quiet in terms of their sense of optimism right now. That's how one Harris ally just described it to me a short time ago. I ran into a long-time Democratic source, a person who was close to the Harris campaign.
Yeah, he's 90% with a 150K lead.
Not looking so good for us, but then they quickly put on a smile and said, but you know what? We just got to keep smiling for the night. That may give you a better understanding of where they feel like things may be going right now. It remains early. A lot of votes still to count, but I'll tell you what I just heard from a Democratic lawmaker right now who just wrote me in part, quote, "It's pretty concerning. I just keep reminding myself that 8 years ago, all the trends in the first few hours showed Hillary winning, and then she didn't. But obviously, this is not the return we were looking for." It gives you a little sense of the way that some of those people supporting Kamala Harris.
I don't know. I remember
this evening right
maybe
now.
Maybe
I
mean, it was a long time ago. I forgot about.
Still to be counted right now, but
I feel like didn't Trump win with like 305 or something?
Some of the early results we're seeing in some of those places, North Carolina, Georgia, are not looking as positive as the Harris campaign had been hoping. It doesn't mean that they still don't have a path, but it does certainly increasingly mean that they have to succeed in holding on to that blue wall. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Is Harris going to win?
Speaking to some people in some of those states,
you think that there's a way to make a lot of money?
That's where they are seeing some concern.
Yeah,
that's going to be a tightrope that they have to still try to walk tonight.
That's good. And Peter, we were just talking here. There's a sense that the polls were in fact right. Are they getting that sense that the polls are really reflecting what we're watching?
Well, I mean, nationally, this is basically an evenly divided country, right? So the idea that our last poll showed at 49-49 is sort of a overall popular vote, that may be pretty close to where this thing ends up. But remember, for the Democrats to win the Electoral College, they generally have to have a better advantage as it relates to the popular vote. So
they got the
country's evenly divided in terms of a popular vote. That may not be enough for the Democrats.
That's funny.
Still a long way to go, obviously. Nobody here is leaving. They're still waiting to hear from the vice president. They recognize this may be not just a matter of hours, but days right now, and they're still hopeful that people are waiting in line, including on those college campuses. They point to campuses in Pennsylvania in particular, some of the campuses out west in Nevada, they're still circling on the map, a place they think that they have the ability to perform well in right now, but, you know, frankly, that's the candidate assessment for the people I'm talking to, so I pass it on to you.
And as we said, none of the battleground states have been called as of yet, so
this
we
is real bad.
But they're as close as they can be. Let's go to battleground Wisconsin. Shaquille Brewster in Milwaukee for us. Hi, Shaq.
Hi there, Savannah. And you know, one thing that we're hearing is that just heard from the Milwaukee elections clerk, and they're saying that they are processing these absentee ballots. All of the early vote, all of the mail-in vote is counted here in this warehouse. And this update is despite the fact that there was a little hiccup that we saw earlier today. I'll show you what happened is on these tabulators that we see. And if you look closely at that red sticker there, they say that that flap was not locked. The tabulator was sealed, but the actual flap there that opens up, it was not completely locked. So what they did is they got a bipartisan group together. They went through to all of the 13 tabulators, high-speed tabulators in this entire facility, and they went through and emptied them out and restarted the count of some 30,000 ballots. Now, despite that, They say that they're moving along fairly well. When you look around here, you see at each of these stations, the election workers, the election clerks are counting those ballots. And, you know, when you talk to operatives in the state, one thing that they're focused on is what will come from the vote here in Milwaukee.
I'm
and
just looking at some of the things on the Twitter.
Who said he's feeling very good about what they're seeing on the Republican side. They say when you look at Dane County, that Vice President Harris is not meeting her marks there.
Yeah.
And pointing to Milwaukee, he's saying that the
That's true.
turnout is not meeting what the Democrats should be getting in this area of the state. But when you look at the amount of vote that's here, we know there's about 107,000 ballots that have yet to be counted, and we're still hours away from that being sent over to the county for the public to see. So it's expected to be a long night of counting here in Milwaukee.
All right, Shaq, thanks very much.
Let's go over to Tom Yamas, who's over at the big board. Couple of things. Let's look at North Carolina.
You got it.
Still too early to call. And how about Virginia?
Yeah.
The blue state haven't called it yet.
We'll talk about both those because both states have interesting things happening. So first off, 85% of the voting, if you're asking yourself, why is it too early to call? Why hasn't NBC News projected this race just yet? Because listen, there's still 875,000 votes that are out. So we're going to wait till we can make a clear projection
When
there.
Trump
I do
wins,
wanna
he's gonna
highlight
put all
some
the
things.
gay
I've been
people
talking
in
about
jail.
Charlotte, Mecklenburg County all night long. This is where Democrats had to turn out the vote. This is where races are won and lost in the state of North Carolina, is in Charlotte. Clinton at 62, Biden at 66.7. Harris is at 65. Remember, she has to win this state because they lost it 4 years ago. She has to be doing better than Biden. And now I want to take you to the Black Belt. Again, these are the counties that there's not a ton of people, but they're largely African-American counties. And I'm going to compare this to 2020. And I want you guys to watch these numbers. Remember, the number on the left, it has to be higher. The number on the left has to be higher.
Yeah, it's
so
not.
We're going to lock this in. Let's go through here. And just
It's
watch.
not.
Every county,
It's
she's
not.
underperforming.
It's not.
With a lot of the vote, there's still some vote out. But in almost every county, she's underperforming. Again, this is the Black Belt, high proportion of African-American voters here, and she's underperforming. Not a population center, but if she wants to win,
Michigan,
North Carolina,
he's ahead
she
by
has to be doing
4%
better there. I know you were asking about Virginia. Savannah, let's take a look at Virginia. We haven't called Virginia yet. You know,
He's ahead by over
just to give you
100,000.
context, the last two elections, it came kind of close to 2016, about 4 percentage points, 5 percentage points. In 2020, Biden grew that lead much more. It was about 10 points there. Tonight, here's where it's at. 77% of the votes in. There's about a 2% spread. I'm being told by our politics desk, a lot of the vote that is out is still in the Northern Virginia suburbs. This is the Democrats' sort of, there's a sweet spot where they're going to drive up the votes. Also, Richmond County, a lot of African-American voters there, too.
It looks
that
like
could
he's gonna
possibly
lose
vote
Virginia.
Democratic. But listen, Republicans have been making inroads in there as well. We can take a quick gander. How much time we have? About a minute? 2 minutes?
down by
We're going to say goodbye.
50,000.
We'll come back. We'll dig into those northern suburbs in just a minute,
We got
Savannah.
3
Let's do,
minutes.
because, you know,
Yeah.
there's
3 minutes
some
until
resident
until
Todd
California.
that you can't-
We're waiting on that vote.
You're waiting on that vote, but I want to go to Mark Lauder on this. Also, I think the Washington, D.C. former area
Minnesota
resident,
was
so
some
you
fans.
get to weigh in on this too, and you too, Senator. I mean,
this one?
would you have expected that
Yeah.
Virginia would take this long to call? I mean, is this concerning? Does it give you any other trend lines?
No, I mean, I saw a lot of energy in
California is
Virginia
gonna go red.
I've seen a lot more Trump signs in people's yards where 4 years ago, 8 years ago,
I got a feeling it's
would've
probably
never
not gonna go
dared
red.
put one up there. So I think there was a little more.
I don't think that's going to. It would be really funny if it happened, but I don't think it's going to happen.
But I think this does point to what we were talking about. We see going on in Philadelphia, which we see going on in some of the other Charlotte areas. She's underperforming in the metro areas, which is where she needs to overperform.
I think when it's all counted, when everything comes in Northern Virginia, and Chuck's not here, so I'm a little nervous. But I think she'll end up winning Virginia by a comfortable margin. And I think when you actually analyze the data, what you're going to see is there was more enthusiasm in the rural areas of Virginia than there was for Biden. I mean, I think we need to start saying out loud that, what is different between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Everybody thinks they're exactly the same on policies, but one is a woman of color and the other is a white man that everybody was really comfortable with, that were moderates and knew him well and had known him for decades. So I think you're seeing more Trump support in some of the areas where Biden could cut in. But Virginia's going to be fine. She's going to win Virginia.
But you might see that maybe in like a Lackawanna County or something in Pennsylvania, like that same dynamic that you're talking about.
Yeah.
We shall see. Okay. We want to pause just a moment. We've got a lot more to
The
get
Trump
to.
lead is just
top of the
getting
hour,
bigger.
We're going to have the big poll closings in California. Got an election alert.
Yep.
Poll closing in about 20 seconds or now. So there'll be some biggies out there to talk about.
Yeah, you see California, I know Oregon, Washington, those will all be closing here in about 10 seconds. And then, of course, we'll have the latest characterizations. We're going to pause for a moment while some of our East Coast stations go to their local news.
All right, let's get it.
And welcome back at the top of the hour, 11 o'clock hour, Harry. The East NBC News can project that Kamala Harris will win in the state of California. 54 electoral votes.
Yeah, go on.
In the state of Idaho, NBC News projects Donald Trump will win and take those 4 electoral votes in Idaho. Here's a map where it moves in the road to 270.
145
Donald
to
Trump at 214.
Come on, we got to give her a little bit of a chance, right?
So things certainly becoming a little more interesting as the evening progresses.
Okay, for the 11 o'clock poll closings, we have a
Is there
couple
a chance
of
Kamala
call
wins?
races,
Absolutely.
Oregon and Wisconsin. We just called California. Now
Absolutely,
let's
she
go to
could
our
win.
battleground. Pennsylvania, too close to call. 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock in the West. Same story in Michigan, too close to call at this hour, with about a third of the vote counted there.
Michigan,
in Wisconsin, it is too close to call. You knew it would be a tight election. The polls all showed it, and that's certainly being borne out tonight. 60% of the vote in there. In Georgia, it is too close to call. Getting
Trump is
closer to that
ramping in
final number there,
Pennsylvania.
but we're still, the margins are
He's
just too
ramping
close to
hard.
make a call in that presidential race. Same thing in North Carolina. In fact, it's too early to call. We're still awaiting vote there. In Arizona, let's go out west. We've got 2 battlegrounds out west. We've got Arizona and Nevada.
Oh, my
Polls
God.
closed there about a couple of hours
California.
ago. 2 hours for Arizona. Last hour for Nevada. Both of these too early to call. And Tom Yamas over at the board, and we talk about Arizona. We haven't given its due tonight. Maricopa County, and don't forget the great county of Pima County, home to Tucson, Arizona.
And to give some credit to Arizona, already 50% of the vote is in. I mean, they're doing their job there, so congrats to them. Maricopa County, this is the big swing county that we're going to be watching here. This is going to be about 60% of the vote in the state of Arizona. So important. If you want to win Arizona, you got to win Maricopa. You can see Trump won it in 2016. Biden won it in 2020. Tonight, with 50% in, Kamala Harris is on top right now. Phoenix, one of the 5th largest city in the country, one of the fastest growing areas in the country. Something else interesting about Maricopa, it's not so much people from other states moving there for the jobs, it's people from all over Arizona moving to this area. You have Mesa, Tempe, Scottsdale, a lot of growth there. We're going to go to this other county here, Pima County. Savannah, you part of this county? Maybe not. 50% of it is in. This is Tucson. This is a Democratic stronghold, but it's not like Cambridge, Massachusetts, right? It's not 60-40 split. It sometimes is, but not really. Tonight, she's doing well.
Look who it is.
She's turning out the vote there. About 30% Hispanic in Pima County as well. It's on the border. Just next door to Pima is Yuma. Now, this is majority Hispanic, an interesting county, but this is a place where Republicans can run up the score. Trump overperforming right now. Only 35% of the vote is in. Arizona, still very, very early. 11 electoral votes. As we get information, we'll sort of dissect it and figure it out, but it's going to be a while before we call Arizona, Savannah, as you know.
All right, thank you,
Where's this
Tom. We got
Nevada
our
shit?
panel here. We got Chuck. We got Savannah Sellers over here. Chuck, what are you making of what we're seeing, what the trend lines are?
There's a reason why there's anxiety in the Harris camp and growing enthusiasm and optimism. I think all the trend lines looks a lot more like 2016 to me than it does 2020. And you're seeing whether it's rural turnout surging up, but we've had to up our projection of total turnout in Georgia than what we saw. And as we've been saying, and we'd seen this, higher turnout was always going to be better for Trump. Not, there's always been this pre-Trump era conventional wisdom used to be Democrats.
Idaho, 40 people voted.
But he has
there's
these
40 people in Idaho?
And it looks like, and we're actually even seeing evidence of what I call these shotgun Trump voters. They come in, they vote Trump, and they leave. Because there's about 100,000 vote gap. I mean, the Democratic Senate candidates in the blue wall are all in better shape right now than Harris.
And did Republicans crack the code of early voting and finally glomming onto that, even though Donald Trump is sending a separate message?
Well, one might argue now, if you look at the 3 Trump elections, 1, he obsessively made sure people didn't vote early. 2,
because it was rigged.
One was at 16, and then it's this one. So you may be onto something.
Doesn't look good on Fox.
I do think the bigger story is their ability to
What does it say on Fox?
expand the electorate. He used to have a seat
193 to
of about
216.
47,
Oh, it's
48.
close.
That's not the case today.
It's
He
close
expanded
on
it another
Fox.
point or two. That's significant, as we know, in a razor-thin environment. Even if you're just adding 50,000 to your voter rolls.
New York Times,
well,
Trump has
that's the difference
88%
in winning
chance
and
of victory.
losing. Half the blue wall. I heard your Dallas Cowboys thing. You know, I mean, there you go, right? I mean,
Do it again?
Yeah, I mean,
It also works for Lambeau Field. The
Well-
last four, literally, I would say like,
a better stadium to pick. You don't want to have losing team.
yeah, oh my God. Here we go. No, just that our last election was decided by 80,000 voters in 4 states that would fill
But
football
can we also
stadiums.
remember one other thing here? Because she was trying to do something as a sitting vice president that had never been done before. Succeed an unpopular president. Okay? Hubert Humphrey tried to do this, and he came 1 percentage point short. It was a very close election. The electoral vote wasn't close, but it was a very close election. But he came up short. Al Gore tried to do this. While Bill Clinton's presidency was popular, Bill Clinton, the individual, was not. We all know he came up 537 votes short, as Lester will tell you over and over again. So the last sitting vice president to win was George H.W. Bush, with an outgoing president that had a 60-plus approval rating. He was at 41%. I mean, that is, you are asking somebody to overperform in a way that we may find out was political.
This sounds a little bit like a postmortem, so I want to make sure
we're there.
We have not called.
Let me give you the Harris campaign.
They know if they win, it's going to be like this. Like, their path is razor thin.
That's exactly what they're saying. There's this new memo that is out now from the chair of the Harris campaign that was sent to staffers obtained by our Monica Alba and our team that covers the Harris camp. And this is exactly the point, right? Which is why I wanted to jump in here on this. They say that the closeness of this race is what we prepared for all along. They still see data trickling in from Sunbelt, but all along they knew it was going to be blue wall. I mean, listen, to a degree, of course, this is what they're going to say, but they say they think they're still feeling good about Pennsylvania, overperforming turnout in Philadelphia and some of these areas. In Michigan, they say there's still a lot of vote to come in. In Wisconsin, there's still a lot of vote remaining. General Mally Dillon says in this memo, we've been saying for weeks this race may not be called tonight. Go ahead.
We do have an NBC News projection in the state of Oregon. NBC News projects that Kamala Harris will win in Oregon when the votes are counted. Here's there's the breakdown right now. 220,000 vote difference.
It's
45%
over for
of the
Donald.
vote in. But again, Kamala Harris is the projected winner there. In our road to 270, you see it there on the screen. 214 for Donald Trump. Harris with 153. The big prize is still no call. We continue to wait.
Interesting that memo is focusing on the blue wall. That's all that's saying they're not expecting a North Carolina victory or Georgia or...
Those are 2 states. I'm just looking at this on my computer. I don't see either of those 2 states mentioned here. They do talk about Nevada and Arizona. It's going to be a bit, but the bottom line is they feel like this race is not going to come into focus until the early morning hours.
The fascinating thing about what Hallie just read, Chuck says this feels like 2016. That's almost verbatim a memo that we got in 2016 saying we're focused on the blue wall. Everyone's focused on the blue wall. No one panic. And this, we have a lot more vote to count. So I want to be very cautious in saying this, but totally, it is fascinating that is the message that they're
Well,
sending.
not for nothing. They did their last rally, Kamala Harris in Philadelphia on the
whole
eve
last
of
day.
the election.
All she did was focus on
Which is
CA.
exactly what...
They had their eye on the ball. I mean, you can't say, right, they didn't do that in 2016, right? She was doing Arizona, she was doing Texas, and she sort
The
of...
night before was in Philly.
True, but they sort of didn't do the blue wall. To their credit, I mean, she lived in Pennsylvania, but I'll tell you this, we'll see, there's probably a lot of people wondering, who should be the running mate? Who should be on this Democratic ticket?
We had that discussion
Yeah.
because some people will... If she
It'll be-
loses Pennsylvania,
Molesta
they'll
tenía
be
más atrás,
That's the
boludo.
only state, right? That'll be the answer.
Because Josh Shapiro is a
sácame.
very popular Democratic governor who was on the short list for vice president. Let's bring Savannah Sellers into this. I mean, what are you reading out of the exit polls? Are you seeing any trend lines? I know you've got your brief. You really look at young voters and you've got your finger on the pulse there. What stands out?
Absolutely. I'll start with some numbers and then give you some anecdotal information. First, let's talk about first-time voters. This is not just young voters, but that's 57% of these first-time voters are under the age of 30. They are breaking for Trump. That is a major reversal from 2020. 53% for Trump right now, 46% for Harris. Back in 2020, 64% went for Biden. Some thing that I've been tracking, and I've been even watching it tonight on apps like TikTok, on apps like Instagram, when you just talk about like who's popular, who do people like. The Harris campaign had such a robust internal social media play. They had this team of 20-somethings. They had very little oversight. They were allowed to kind of post what they wanted, react in real time to trends, to the news cycle.
We remember Brad Summer and the whole Brad.
They co-opted that immediately, exactly, which by the way is a compliment to say Brad now.
What kind of retarded shit did they think that was going to do?
Going on internally, it was not as robust. He had
Oh,
this sort of
fuck. What
grassroots
the
organic
fuck are you
catch
talking
on
about?
TikTok. I heard so many young people say to me in a positive way also, he is a meme. His things travel far. It's objectively funny when you see this information. So many young people, therefore, on these apps were served content straight from and straight about the former president. And we are hearing so much right now. I'm hearing that in lines in Arizona. Gotti was mentioning that earlier.
It went down a bit.
So much. It was because I heard him on a podcast. It was because
they have to change the votes to Kamala Harris.
I also heard from a voter in almost every single swing state and multiple in several of them, including Pennsylvania, voters who were eligible in this age group to vote in 2020 who did not, and they came out tonight to vote for the former.
I'd be so interested. He's winning the youth vote in these exit polls. I'd be fascinated to see what the gender breakdown is there too, because this poll with young men, and that was a concerted effort by the Trump campaign, and the Joe Rogan and the bro wave seems to be real.
Gen Zers, okay?
Is it
one
bro
who votes
wave?
and one who's going to be voting next year. One in each gender, and I see it with their friends. You see it. It's real. This gap. This is not about Trump and Harris. There is a growing cultural gap, if you will, between young men and young women.
Fucking
It is really
if you want to
Fucking
get your gap on this.
obviously.
First-time men, Trump 62%,
Yep.
Harris 36%. First-time women, the gap is less here. Trump 46%, Harris 53%. That young men turnout is real.
Well, people who thought that young women would be voting in droves for Kamala Harris, especially because of reproductive, because I mean that exit poll does not suggest that.
Absolutely.
Because it wasn't.
Chuck has been saying, which is that the person who ultimately winds up winning this war of the sexes is the candidate who does a better job appealing to the weaker gender for them, whoever's weaker for them. And so we've seen Trump not only clearly energize, drive up young men of various different racial backdrops, but also chip away at Vice President Harris's lead. I mean, her lead among women continues to be, based on what we're seeing so far, less than his lead with men.
The gender gap is interesting, but also, as we've alluded to here on the table, the education gap is also becoming such an interesting storyline here. As Chuck talks about kind of a realignment in this moment and where we are, that's another thing to be watching for tonight.
Yeah.
Again, it is 11:11 Eastern time, but there's still plenty of vote to come
I
in.
want to go to Tom right now. Tom, I'm looking at Wisconsin. Looks like 62% of the vote in there. You're picking up some things.
Yeah, too close to call right now. Trump on top 50%, by 39,000. Remember, the last two elections in Wisconsin, presidential elections, 20,000 votes was the difference between both candidates here. We want to go back to Madison, the capital of Wisconsin, Dane County. This is also the site of the University of Wisconsin.
How is the East still counting?
92% of the vote in. Harris doing a little better than when we last checked in with her, but again, she's slightly underperforming Biden. She still has time to catch up. There's still 8% of the vote that's out. We actually know
They're using
exactly
paper
how much of the
ballots.
vote is out. About 30,000 votes remain there. So maybe she picks up the margins there. We also want to talk about Milwaukee. This is the biggest population center in the entire state of Wisconsin. Right now, 54% of the vote is in, so a lot of that vote is still out. It's probably going to be a little bit later. So we can call Milwaukee by itself. Biden is at 69. She's down about 2 to 3 points. Again, this would be concerning for Democrats. But look, there's still a lot of vote out in Milwaukee. Door County, if you've been following the presidential race at all, everyone's been talking about Door County in Wisconsin.
52 million people voted for Donald.
Michigan. The last 6 statewide
Orange
elections,
man
presidential elections, I should say, they picked the winner. This is a good sign for Kamala Harris. She's on top there, overperforming Biden. Just like 95% of the vote is in. Again, Door, if we bring it out to past elections, it always picks the winner in the state of Wisconsin. But that's a good sign for her because it's a bellwether. I do want to check in some of these Democratic strongholds. Eau Claire, 92% in, kind of performing at the same level as Biden. That's good for her. She wants to keep it there. We don't have any data there. What else we have? I think here in La Crosse, this is another Democratic stronghold.
They haven't counted, like, all they counted is, like, these other random
55, I should say. She's slightly underperforming. So listen, still a lot of vote. Let me see see how much vote's still out. Still about 40% of the vote. But here's what's tough for Democrats in Wisconsin. Of the
52
battleground
million
states,
dummies.
each of those blue wall states is different. But of all the battleground states,
52.6 million dummies.
So they can drive up the margins with at least African-American voters and some Latino voters that are going to stay loyal to the Democrats in this election. What they can do, there's about 100,000 college students in the state of Wisconsin, and they usually fare better, much better with those university students. We're going to have to wait and see, as we say right there, too close to call.
All right, we got a big projection to give right here. This is the Ohio Senate race. It was a hotly contested race. Bernie Moreno, the car dealer, Republican, will pick up that seat, unseating incumbent Sherrod Brown. This is quite a moment because, barring any unforeseen circumstances, it appears that Republicans, with that victory, will take control of the United States Senate. Again, it's not an official projection at that moment, but if things happen as expected, it would look like a two-seat game here in the Senate. And so this is a hugely consequential vote here. Sherrod Brown in a red state.
So he's going to have the Senate.
Life.
He's going to have the Supreme Court.
Out a few times, but not here tonight.
3 times, Savannah, and he has been someone who's been very adept at straddling that line, reaching out to working class voters throughout his state. His father was a doctor, grew up in Mansfield, really had that working class appeal, and yet this Trump-backed candidate, Bernie Moreno, a car dealer, able to topple him tonight. Again, we've been looking for ticket splitters. Didn't find one here in the state of Ohio. Again, this in line with what we've seen, which is that ticket splitters have been diminishing.
He only overperformed, Sherrod Brown only overperformed Harris by about 2 points. He needed to overperform about 4 or 5. But this is no longer about, Democrats knew they probably weren't going to hold the Senate. The question was, can they limit the Republicans to
53 million?
Because if they can limit it to
53 million idiots,
you can find 2 or 3 seats to pick up in the 2026 midterms. But if it gets to 53 or 54, sitting out there, and it's really is a coin flip race right now. That's a unique situation. But they could get to 53 or 54, which could put the Senate out of reach for Democrats.
The difference is just getting bigger.
So at this point tonight, it's about whether Democrats can hold enough of their seats this cycle so they actually have a shot at winning back the Senate, can be competitive in 2026.
Sherrod Brown way outspent Bernie Moreno in Ohio, too. Just dumped a ton of money, pro-Democratic allies in the state of Ohio. But remember why the Senate matters, not to give a civics lesson here, right? But the Senate can act in some ways as the brakes or the accelerator for whoever ends up in the White House. They can either get a president's policies moving to a degree if the House is the same party, or not, right? And that's what this comes down to here, is how much, if it is Donald Trump in the White House and a Republican Senate, what could they do for his policies? If it is Kamala Harris in the White House and a Republican Senate, how does that interplay work when it comes to some of the issues?
I have to say the House is much more important, though, at this point. If the Democrats are not going to win the White House, they have to have that. I mean, if you win the White House, you want your party back. If you're going to not have a chamber, don't have the Senate. It's the House you're really worried about, because the House has subpoena power. And so if the House is of the same party, you can navigate Washington a lot easier. The Senate's not easy, but you can find bipartisan coalitions in the Senate.
And this is what the House looks like, right?
The House, at this point, if whoever wins the presidency, you want your party to have, because if you don't, then it's subpoena, and then you can be tied up. Your entire agenda can get tied up.
But unlike the Senate,
correct.
We're not talking about.
They're talking like she already lost.
No doubt, we might not be talking about a House until we go to Savannah's for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no, she done.
And even then, it may be the Friday after.
At your own risk, I think you all know how I feel. But the House is not expected to track the presidential. And
correct, so because Senate, of New York and California.
Yes, exactly. And we'll be waiting New York and California. Some of these tight races, it could be weeks. It was weeks in 2020. But I mean, the prospect is there. If are we going to have divided government? As Americans have so often chosen divided government, they seem to like it.
Chosen or stumbled into it.
Yes. Well, and remember, Democrats only need 4 seats to take back control of the House. And so they like their chances there. What's so interesting is that we're covering all of these various battleground states, Pennsylvania, and all of the blue wall states. The House is really going to be won and fought in New York and California. So it's a very different terrain, and again, could be over a week, if not longer, before we know.
Let's turn to NBC's Garrett Higgins at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Garrett, what's the former president doing now? And I'm wondering if there's been any reaction to what appears to be a change of power in the Senate.
I gotta make myself some more steaks.
Not to that specifically, Lester, but let me set the scene for you here, just to get the lay of the land down here in South Florida, because some of this will matter later on tonight, perhaps. We're in West Palm Beach right now at the Convention Center, which is the Trump campaign tonight. Donald Trump is across the Intercoastal Walkway at this hour at Mar-a-Lago, his home and private club, where for a portion of the night he was doing, I think, what many people sort of imagine candidates do on election night, meeting with advisors, watching the returns come in, checking the numbers. At some point this evening, according to multiple sources who are laid eyes on him, he has transitioned into essentially party mode already, down in the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, shaking hands, thanking supporters, participating in the celebration that has begun among his supporters, his family and friends, despite a race that remains uncalled. Also told, NBC News can also report that he's in discussions with his aides and advisors about when he might make the trip across the bridge here to West Palm Beach to give some form of speech tonight. Now, we have been asking him about this day after day. Would he declare victory early? Would he rule out the possibility?
I'm surprised he hasn't already declared victory
early. We all remember him doing exactly that in 2020 when so much of the vote remained to be counted. He has refused to take an early declaration of victory off the table, and it's our understanding now that
wait, so each taco is $2 now?
Tonight,
I thought it was $1.
We are on the path to 207 votes.
All right, Garrett, thank you so much. And we're joined now by podcast hosts John Lovett and Dan Pfeiffer, both White House veterans. I believe we have them right now. Oh, not yet. We're going to go to, if they're coming up.
We're going to go to Peter Alexander.
Peter Alexander, get this view from the Harris headquarters. It sounds like Donald Trump is talking about coming out and saying something. What are you hearing from the Harris campaign?
Yeah, well, I always defer to the Pod Save America guys. If they want to go, you let me know when they're ready. But we are waiting to hear, of course, from Kamala Harris at some point over the course of this evening. No indication that that would happen. Some early indications that might happen in the course of this hour. No confirmation on that at this time. We'll keep you posted as we know. I will tell you, though, the course of the last 15 minutes, NBC News did obtain a memo that was sent out by the chair of the Harris campaign, Jen O'Malley Dillon, the woman who orchestrated Joe Biden's victory in 2020. This was sent to staff, and it gives you a sense of where they are heading into this evening. They expect nothing will be determined until late into the night, and certainly they say they're going to be at this again tomorrow. But as she notes in this memo again, she says that they have always said that the clearest path to 270 electoral votes lies through the blue wall states. And here's what she says specifically about Pennsylvania. She says that we overperformed turnout expectations in Philadelphia and overperformed in our early vote expectations in Bucks County, one of those key collar counties, those key suburbs of Philadelphia. She says we don't have election day results from Philadelphia, but we do know that we overperformed turnout expectations there, and have seen especially high turnout in places with non-white and student populations. One thing they're keeping a close eye on right now. About Michigan particularly, they say the city of Detroit won't be reporting out until roughly midnight, but that they have seen strong turnout from early vote and election day voting in other parts of the state. And finally, in Wisconsin, where they're keeping a close eye on that blue wall, that they do not expect complete results from Wisconsin until tomorrow morning between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. But the biggest takeaway perhaps from this memo is the sense that as the chips start falling, it appears that they are leaning heavily into the blue wall, which started and may be ending as their best path to victory here. Despite some numbers that show they still have some ground to make up, there's still a lot of data out there, and that's where, at least according to her memo, they're effectively saying goodbye to the staff for the night. Says we'll do it again late into the night and start again strong in the morning. That's where they are as this night heads toward midnight.
All right, Peter, thank you. Now, without further ado, let's go to the hosts of Pod Save America, Democrats John Lovett and Dan Pfeiffer, both White House veterans. And Dan, I know you to be a number cruncher, and I wonder what you're thinking about the numbers that you're seeing. You just heard what the Harris campaign is saying, but the vibe check is that this path is narrowing significantly, and that it's blue wall or bust at this point for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that seems right. And we look at the numbers, it's very clear that Trump is overperforming in rural counties, and Harris is overperforming in suburban counties. And what is going to maybe the deciding factor here is primarily going to be what is the turnout and the vote margins coming out of Milwaukee Philadelphia, and Detroit. And if they are what we think they are, then she has a very clear, albeit narrow, but clear path to be the next president of the United States.
Let me ask you about what we've been observing. Young voters, particularly male voters, who seem to be breaking for Trump and in fact winning the youth vote according to our exit polls. Does that surprise you? What's your take on that?
If that surprises you, you're stupid.
That would be surprising. I think that's another reason to drink.
You're stupid.
But I do think that I
You're
think
drinking
it's
alone,
pretty
John.
early. I think it's fine, and that's fine. I think it's pretty early to be drawing conclusions based on the exits and trying to figure out what happened with specific demographics. I think where we're at is this was always going to be close. It is close right now. I think there was some hope based on vibes that perhaps this wouldn't be as close based on some late polling and some late momentum and a terrible event at Madison Square Garden. Could we hope that maybe this night wouldn't be as long? And the answer is no. The polls largely were showing a very tight race, and that's what we're kind of looking through.
Dan, do you think it will ultimately come down to Pennsylvania? I mean, that certainly has been what's been telegraphed for all of these months.
It is the essential state because if Georgia and North Carolina, she does not win, and there's still a lot of outstanding votes in Georgia, it's once again a narrow path, but if those do not end up in her column, there is no map without Pennsylvania. You can replace Wisconsin with Arizona, you can replace Michigan with Arizona and Wisconsin, but you need Pennsylvania, and so it will come down to Pennsylvania.
All right, Dan Pfeiffer, John Levitt, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
And we have another call to make. I believe we're going to Washington, state of Washington presidential call. Let's see where NBC News now projecting that Kamala Harris will win the 12 electoral votes in the state of Washington. Here's how it breaks down right now. A difference of about 472,000, 473,000 votes. And the road to 270, that leaves Harris with 165, 214 for Donald Trump down. Let's go to Republicans Mike Dubke, White House Communications Director under former President Trump, and Sarah Fagan, a former aide to George W. Bush. Mike, first of all, give me your thoughts here. We've had no calls in battleground states so far. Is this a matter of viewing pieces through a microscope right now to try to understand where this is going?
Well, it sounds that way from the Harris campaign, but I want to stick with the vibe comment that John Levitt just made. Because I really do think that what we're seeing now is this coming to fruition, this vibe versus issues election that we've had. The Harris campaign really put on the vibes, the joy, and all of that. And I think the Trump campaign tried to stick to issues, immigration, inflation, instability around the world. And if you look at the exit polls that you all have been talking about today, you really see that Americans think that the country's on the wrong track. We think the economy, we're better off 4 years ago than we are today. And when you look at the way Harris tried to distance herself from Biden, I think this all came down to whether she'd be successful with that, and it looks like she was.
Hey, Mike, let me just ask you, just bear with me for a second, because we have another projection that we're going to put up here on the screen. And this is the state of Connecticut. NBC News projected that Kamala Harris will win in Connecticut when all the votes are counted. 7 electoral votes. There's the breakdown right now, about a 10-point difference between the two of them. And here's where it takes us in the road to 270. Donald Trump standing at 214. Harris down with 172 electoral votes. We'll get back to our conversation. Sarah, let me turn to you. You've heard a little bit about this memo now with this campaign memo. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's a campaign doing what it can to try to keep hope alive. Look, I don't see any good news for Democrats in these results. Donald Trump is running about a point or a point and a half ahead of where he was in 2020. And in these counties, in these blue wall counties that 75% of the vote is in, and Kamala Harris is running behind in these urban areas by 1 or 2 points compared to where President Biden performed. You look at that coupled with Donald Trump's overperformance with Hispanic voters, with young voters. I don't think they have a lot to hang their hat on. It's not over. There's votes to be counted. We should point out that these blue wall states tend to be red mirage. They go red and then they tend to go, the race narrows as these big urban areas come in later. But when you just look at the underperformance of Kamala Harris and the overperformance of Trump, it's going to be pretty hard, I think, for her to catch him.
Yeah, the Harris team is saying they believe they overperformed in Philadelphia. Does that give you pause?
I don't see where they're saying that. Now they're looking, I'm sure, at precinct analysis, and we're looking at a county total, so we should give that caveat. But, you know, Joe Biden got 80% of the vote in Philadelphia, and she's not running anymore. And I think she's, last I looked, was at 77 or 78%. So that's a pretty significant difference when a race is as close as it is.
All right, Sarah and Mike, thanks to both of you. Tom Yamas has more from the big board on Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia, but I also want to give this just sort of a vibe check of where we are. It is still very early in the night, right? And even though people may be claiming they've won certain states yet, we still haven't called any of the battlegrounds here at NBC News. And a reminder, Harris's easiest path is to hold the blue wall. If she wins Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, remember, she gets to the White House. Even if she loses Georgia, North Carolina, the entire Sun Belt, she still gets there. Let's talk about Georgia, though. Let's find out where we are there in the Peach State. Still too close to call for NBC News right now.
If she wins all the ones that she's losing, she'll win.
Let's talk about where the vote remains. Look at, okay, the giant circles, remember those giant bubbles? Guys, that's the vote that still is outstanding. We're still waiting on this vote to be counted. And we know the exact number. We can estimate the exact number. We think it's going to be about 487,000 votes. There's still almost 500,000 votes out in Georgia. Still up for grabs here. Let's make some comparisons here. Remember, I told you Harris has to drive up the vote in the Atlanta metro area. 50% of the vote is going to come from this area right here. First county, Cobb County, she's performing just like where Biden is.
The media really wants her to win.
Fulton County,
no, the media wants Trump to win.
A little bit lower, but slightly, and there's still 7% of the vote out.
Watching a Trump wins.
Atlanta is exactly.
Media doesn't actually like Harris at all.
Look, she's
they act like they do, but they actually want Trump to win.
Biden was. She's overperforming in Douglas County as we move
further
make more money south. That way. Look, she's almost exactly where Biden was all around the ring counties of Atlanta. That's good news and overperforming in Rockdale County. But if Democrats wanted to expand the map, we're not seeing that tonight. A place like Cherokee, we're going to see if they can make inroads there, just north of Atlanta. It touches those ring counties. Trump was at 68% in 2020. Tonight he's at 69%. And everyone's got all the vote counted there. I want to move down, though, because there is something interesting happening in the black belt of Georgia. I was talking to you guys about the black belt of North Carolina earlier and how she was underperforming there. Remember, this was Biden's number. This is her number tonight. Watch as we go around here, okay? These are our counties where it's a majority African American. 52%, 50% for Kamala Harris. This is a rural county. Trump is overperforming here. We go to another rural red county, overperforming here. We come down here to Doherty County. She's slightly overperforming Biden there. But again, if she wants to win the state of Georgia, she's got to be doing better than Biden. It seems like she could be doing that in Atlanta. The numbers are good for her right now in the metro region, but it's still really too close for us to call here in Georgia.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much. I'm going to go to Chuck because, Chuck, we were talking about Donald Trump getting new voters, people that didn't vote in 2020, and those voters breaking for him. And you're seeing some pretty astounding numbers.
Well, you are. You know, it's interesting. Well, first of all, look, Georgia is going to shrink. That's you got about all of this vote is going to be Democratic vote. She's got to win the remaining probably 2-1. It's like a reasonable thing. I mean, Georgia's probably going to be decided by 4 or 5 digits.
And where the vote is outstanding.
Exactly. So, I think we might be sticking around Georgia for a while. Just it does. If you're them, you can't totally write it off. There's a path there. But our pollsters did some noted some comparisons to 2020. Just simply Trump margins. These are not in the battleground states, but it gives you a hint of the possibility Donald Trump could actually win the popular vote if he wins the electoral college. So, for instance, in Texas, he only won Texas by a little over 5 points in 2020.
Last one was 2004,
right? 14 points tonight in Iowa. It was 8 points. It's nearly 15 points tonight. In Florida, it was 3 points. It's nearly 13 points tonight for Trump. Now, let me give you the blue states. Virginia, it was a 10-point Biden victory. Looks like it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 4 this time in Virginia. New Jersey, 15 points Biden. Right now, it's 5 for Harris. Illinois, another state, is a little under 10. It was at 17 points for Biden. So Trump has improved his standing in a lot of blue states. We've seen that in our own polling. But it is why this time we are unlikely to have a split between the popular vote and electoral. Whoever wins the electoral college is probably going to win the popular vote.
Those are pretty dramatic margins. I mean, we're not picking about a point or two here. You're talking about 5 points, 10 points, 7, 8. I mean, that's...
Well, this is the Hispanic shift in the Southeast. It's clear. Florida, Texas, that's the massive Latino shift that we've seen tonight in those 2 states, but it may be spots of it everywhere.
So I'm getting reaction from Democratic lawmakers, from Democratic operatives. Some are still saying, look, we could still win this thing. We can hold on to the blue wall, and that's absolutely accurate because we're still tracking the vote. But one Democratic lawmaker, sort of to the point that Chuck is making, saying, if this race does not go Kamala Harris's way, this is a moment of reckoning for the Democratic Party. This person saying there needs to be a hard look at what went wrong and potentially
put all of them in jail.
Really a real passing of the baton when it comes to leadership. And of course the attention will turn to President Biden. And when he stepped aside, 72% in our exit polls saying the country is headed in the wrong direction. That's the backdrop to all of this. President Biden and this immense dissatisfaction with the direction that the country's headed.
It could be the Democratic Party just allowed itself to just organize itself being an anti-Trump party. And in some ways, so focused on creating an anti-Trump coalition, they stopped being a political party, right? To come up with a basic agenda. And again, right now, I get what that lawmaker is telling you, because if you look at the last, right, the whole, Biden wasn't a pick of the future. It was a whatever you can do for Trump.
All right, we're gonna pause for a moment to welcome back some of our stations on the East Coast.
What the fuck?
It is just past 11:30 here in the East. Welcome back to those viewers rejoining us on this exciting night. I'm Lester Holt.
And I'm Savannah Guthrie. Glad you're along with us. This is NBC's election night coverage, and we've started to fill in that map, but those all-important 7 battlegrounds still ingrained. We have not called them yet. We've been getting minute-by-minute projections, all leading up to this road to 270, which is the magic number needed to win the White House. So let's go through some of the boards here. This is Pennsylvania at this hour. 79% of the vote in, too close to call. We've talked a lot about the different counties and whether there's enough for Kamala Harris to make up where she's lost in some of the rural areas. Let's go to Michigan. Michigan there as well, but a lot more votes to be counted. In Wisconsin, let's see how much we've got there. About 2/3 of the vote or so. Too close to call. In Georgia, we're getting close to a close there, but they do count their votes fast there, and it's 91% in, but we will see what happens. Too close to call. North Carolina, too early to call. We will wait and see what happens there, but again, starting to see 88% of the vote coming in there. Let's go out west. Arizona, too early to call. Polls closed about 2.5 hours ago there.
It's too early to rig it. They have to wait.
The projected winner. This just came in right now. Okay, North Carolina. Donald Trump is the projected winner. You see the margin there, 136,000. So Donald Trump improved on his margin by back of the envelope math, 50,000 votes there in North Carolina. That's a huge disappointment for the Kamala Harris campaign. They had hoped that if North Carolina could be clawed back into the blue column, perhaps that would open up other paths for them out west.
They got to wait to rig it until it gets really late at night, so everybody's asleep.
Where it stands right now,
and then they're going to change all the votes to blue. So Kamala Harris.
Trump in the lead right now.
Let's go to Tom right now. Wait till like 3 a.m. Talk about now what this does to Kamala Harris's paths to victory.
Yeah, let's show you real quick how Trump wins, right? How we project that he wins. Robinson right now, 64.9%, 30% in.
Look, he's ahead in every single one, bro.
You can see Trump's numbers are increasing. 63 4 years ago, 66 tonight. We'll keep moving along here. 50%, 53%. So Lester, you asked, how does this affect?
You know what would be really funny is if Trump won the popular vote, but he lost the Electoral College, and then you had all the Republicans saying the Electoral College is rigged.
This number before we called North Carolina.
That would be really funny.
Trump did. But this is essentially where we started the night. This is the way it ended in 2020.
Right?
After President Biden had won the rest of the battleground states.
That's right, 8 years.
The Republicans and former President Trump poetic. We now move to Georgia. We're going to be looking at the vote in Georgia. But as Chuck mentioned, very, very close in Georgia, and we're going to be waiting on that vote, the full vote to come out of Atlanta in those ring counties right now. But a big win for former President Trump. It's the first battleground we're calling tonight.
All right, Tom, thanks very much.
Remember, there was some late polling in the state that came just over the weekend that suggested that perhaps Kamala Harris was surging in North Carolina, that maybe she was making gains among some of these voters. That is clearly not turning out to be the case. That said, you've seen the reporting from her campaign that they are looking at the all-important blue wall. Of course, the question is, if Georgia goes and
what they mean by blue wall is red wall.
But if Georgia does end up in the red column, it is Pennsylvania.
Well, to that point, the Secretary of State in Georgia,
that's what they meant to say.
People are familiar with. In the last election, it has said on the record that Trump has an insurmountable lead in Georgia with the number of votes outstanding. So he's the Secretary of State. I think he knows what he's speaking of, but we will continue to watch.
We've got another race to call it a presidential call. This is in the state of Virginia. This coming a little later than many people expected, but Kamala Harris will win the 13 electoral votes.
Wow.
In Virginia. There's the breakdown.
There it is.
134,000 vote difference. 84% of the vote in.
Donald L.
The Harris column. Here's where that leaves us.
Stop the count, brother.
Trump with 230, 40 from his goal. Harris with 185 electoral votes.
Okay, let's bring Jen Psaki in, former Biden White House Secretary, and Mark Lauder, who was joining us earlier. Jen, we haven't had a chance to talk to you. I mean, look, it's getting to be a narrower path for Kamala Harris, no question about it. It's the blue wall or bust
the red
at
mirage
this point.
you're going to see.
It's math.
Yeah, it's math.
Look, I think that Jen O'Malley Dillon email that NBC News obtained that you talked about a little bit tells you a lot about where the heads are of the people on the campaign.
This is the chair of the campaign.
The chair of the campaign. She was also the campaign manager when Biden won in 2020. And basically, they did not talk about it. I know NBC has not made a call in Georgia, but they did not mention that Georgia is not a part of that email. Neither is North Carolina. You just made a call on that. It's about the blue wall states, and she warns that Arizona and Nevada will take some time. What does become challenging, I think part of the purpose of an email like that is also to put the troops inside, the team who's been working so hard for months, that's part of it, and also to send that note to supporters. But yes, it becomes, as the path becomes narrower, there's no more margin for error. Or no more margin for something going a different way than you hoped it would. And right now, what the Harris team is doing, which happens on every presidential campaign, as you know as well, is sitting in what you call the boiler room, which is
I would lay down.
that's what it's called, and they're looking at their vote goals in these counties and how the outcome aligns. And you look at everything from, did they get what they needed in the big cities? In Philly, there are some cities that haven't fully come in, so they're waiting for those. But also what the margins are for Trump, which are higher, as you've been reporting, we've been talking about over on MSNBC, in some of the rural counties, meaning he's getting more votes there that they need to make up from the cities. So it's a numbers game in each of these states.
But even in reliable blue states, we're seeing narrowing margins. We just saw it in Virginia. We called it. Kamala Harris won it, but I believe by a smaller margin than she did, or that the Democrats did 4 years ago. I want to show Minnesota right now, which we are calling too close to call. And this is a reliably blue state. Let me show you what the numbers look like.
Minnesota.
The breakdown, half of the vote in. It's called too close to call. Again, when you see that wide margin, you were thinking, what are you guys talking about? It's because our decision desks are crunching the numbers. They know where those votes are coming
over there.
whether they're reliably Trump districts or reliably in Kamala Harris or a Democratic area of the state. On that basis, they're saying too close to call. Does that surprise you?
Minnesota's a close state. It often is a close state. It's a one certainly that the Harris team would love to have been in their win column earlier.
I bet they would.
But again, I think for them, what becomes harder and harder is as you get more vote total in, and the path becomes narrower and narrower and narrower, and that's a bit where they are at this moment.
The sitting governor, Tim Walz, on the ticket. Minnesota's governor.
And probably a popular governor in Minnesota. And there's a lot of things that have been in the mind a little bit if you're the Harris team, including that. I don't know that they're overly worried about Minnesota, but certainly, yes, would have liked to have that and Virginia in their win column earlier.
I think they would have liked to have people on the left that have the last several weeks. How can this be a tie?
What do you mean?
What's your answer?
I would ask the same question. I mean, I think
under the same
because obviously with the economy, with the 2/3 of the American people who think the country's on the wrong track on the immigration, and all of the issues in kind of general polling would suggest that this would be a runaway.
They
for the Republican or for the non-party in power. The fact that it's not, I think there's obviously a lot of...
I think if any other Republican were on the ticket, you'd have much greater margins in terms of a Republican victory?
That's difficult to answer because Donald Trump brings out such a passionate base where you might have a problem getting that overperformance in rural areas because he is so animating, especially on the right. Now, he's equally animating on the left, which turns out that opposition.
Well, you might get suburban women on the side of a different kind of Republican.
Jen, has the conversation begun yet about Joe Biden and about the decision to ask him to step aside?
It will begin. It will begin depending on the outcome. And obviously, there hasn't been a race called yet. If this is not a Harris win, that will certainly be part of the discussion. She's run a campaign over the course of 107 days. That is not something we've seen in history.
She can still win.
And there'll be lots of questions about exactly that, the timing and the impact of that.
Well, Chuck was bringing up the history. I mean, in terms of vice presidents trying to win the presidency with a unpopular president, he said it's bordering on politically impossible.
And this gets back to something that we talked about. The favorability rating for President Biden is low, and you look at some of these numbers on how people feel about the country right now, and about 3 in 4 Americans in the exit polling say they feel angry or dissatisfied, and that is something that may end up being critical in this race as well.
One of the things that I think is so notable heading into tonight, I think one of the big questions, would the economy be the top issue, as Mark was talking about, or would reproductive rights, given that abortion is on the ballot in 10 different states, would that be the biggest energizing factor tonight? What we are seeing is that right now it seems like the economy and immigration continue to be the most motivating factors for people.
And I'm almost interested to see, though, because we did see, especially using Florida as the example, it was not close in Florida, whether at the presidential level or with the Senate, but at the same time they're sending Rick Scott and Donald Trump, obviously, they barely defeated a constitutional amendment on abortion. So they almost, like we would say, split ticket voting with Senate, Congress, and President. They kind of split their ticket going, no, I don't like this, I do like that.
And that's not something that is captured necessarily, because polling doesn't function this way in polling about abortion rights, right? That there are people who could vote for Trump and also vote for protecting abortion rights. Arizona is another interesting state to watch on that front, as you know, Arizona, native, because there are, I talked to Senator, maybe we'll see, Congressman Gallego the other night, and there are people who could be Gallego, Trump, abortion rights voters, which bends the mind a little bit, but that's where maybe we don't entirely understand how the electorate comes down on these issues.
Well, maybe people
are so for them.
Neatly categorized as political journalists would like to
yes,
believe.
That's true.
Well, we're just moments away from midnight here on the East Coast. What are you guys doing tomorrow? I'll tell you what you're doing.
Right
the
here.
battleground states, they have not been called yet. Stay with us. We will be right back after a quick break.
Oh, jeez. 81% with Donald with 200K. Michigan over 100K. Wisconsin. Actually, he doesn't have that big of a lead. You took a California votes? I did. Yeah, y'all see it right there. So it's looking like they're probably going to have about like 11 million people that end up voting for Kamala over there. And it's going to be...
this very close Senate race. Too close to call. Senator Bob Casey looking for re-election against Dave McCormick. 81% reporting right now. Now let's head over to Wisconsin.
Do you think Vance would be further ahead than Trump?
We have Tammy Baldwin looking for another term. She is trying to fend off a challenge from Eric Hovde, businessman Eric Hovde. Let's head over to Montana now. Michigan. We're going to go to Michigan first. Alyssa Slotkin trying to win a Senate seat against Mike Rogers. This race also too close to call. And now let's go to Montana.